Hey, welcome back to the Health Bridge. This is Dr. Pedram Shojai. I am excited to be here today because we're going to get into a conversation that kind of plagues all of us. We've all been told we need to rebuild our gut and do all this stuff with our gut, and it seems like so much work, kind of because it is. And so I called up my dear friend Summer Bach, who basically has been walking hundreds, if not thousands of people through gut rebuilding programs. She is a fermentationist. On her card it says she's a fermentationist, and what that means is she helps ferment vegetables and making the kinds of foods that we've been told we need to eat, but she's doing it from the ground up, and she's been a super supportive person in my life, helping me do stuff just in our own kitchen. So excited to have you here, Summer.
Thanks. I am really excited to be here because I recently sent you something in the mail to help save you from a little disaster. So I can't wait to kind of get into that.
So just to qualify where we're at here is, man, we have all, 6 raised beds in my garden, and one of them we dedicated to cabbage, and cabbage doesn't grow fast, so we spent an entire season growing this stuff. And I was going out of town, and so I grabbed a recipe for sauerkraut inspired by you, and my parents were like, oh, we'll do this. And so I gave my parents, we harvested all the cabbage that seemingly took forever. It's so much easier to just buy stuff, it turns out. and they took it and they tried to make sauerkraut, and something went wrong and it all went funky, and I was just like, no. Failed crop. Well, no, not failed crop, but failed attempt with a good crop. So I called Summer and was basically like, help. So she sent this kit over. So round 2 is going to be awesome sauerkraut, and we're going to get it right this time. Right, sister?
That's right. I can't wait for you to get it right. You need to. It'll be fun to experiment. I can't wait to see I want to see your parents maybe put some really cool flavors in with this for the future.
Oh yeah, no, I'm totally in, and I think that if at first you don't succeed, really leads to good lessons in life and trying to figure out what you did wrong. And look, fermenting stuff is not terribly difficult, but look, I messed it up, or we messed it up. I'll take a group accountability here.
Well, I mean, it's bacteria. They're everywhere. They're invisible. You don't see them, so if something comes in, floats along in the air and contaminates the sauerkraut, you don't necessarily know that when you're first starting out. You don't know exactly what to look out for.
So let's back up a bit and talk about why the hell I would want to do this in the first place. Wouldn't you just eat the cabbage, dude? So what is it about this fermentation process that you have been teaching people, and what, basically why it's such a good thing to do?
I guess I could relate it probably to my personal story would be the first place right now to start. Because, I about 10 years ago, exactly, I was really sick and I had multiple chemical sensitivity. I had panic attacks in the middle of the night. I would wake up, heart racing, sweating, 40 minutes. I'd set the timer for the panic attack to kind of, take its course and end. I had rashes. I just didn't know where they were coming from. I had environmental allergies, really severe. And I was down to the point where I could only eat 20 or 30 foods without a reaction. So I was not feeling so hot. And I am now at the point today where I just got all my food allergy testing and got all my blood work done. And I am clean bill of health, clean. I can eat gluten. I had pizza. Clean.
Come on.
I'm not kidding. So I'm really, really happy. And my whole process for doing this and getting rid of the allergies and getting rid of all of this stuff was rebuilding my gut. And part of rebuilding that was, involved, well, there's a few steps, right? It wasn't overnight, but one of the big things I did was I used fermented foods as a way to start re-inoculating my digestive tract. And along the way, I learned which ones work and which ones don't.
Well, I want to get into that. Let's peel it back for a quick sec, because one of the things that all the kind of functional docs are always talking about is, your gut, you got leaky gut, now you're getting all sorts of immune things, and so what we got to do is take out the bad stuff, rebuild the gut, so that then you can have that cushion against, between you and the outside world, basically, where your immune system doesn't get kind of hyperactive all the time. That's the part where most people get lost, right? It's I know a lot of people that'll try an elimination diet and say, okay, I've identified the 4 things that really bother me, or I did an allergy test and these 90 things bother me. But then getting into actually fixing the gut, I feel like a lot of people stop short, and then these systems tend to persist and haunt them for decades.
Yeah. Well, okay, so like here's the biggest thing I think that people do that I started to do. So I mean, it's like I think it's the natural response when you're like, okay, rebuild the gut is start taking probiotics. But if you're bioterrain, and when I think of the bioterrain, I think of the whole environment inside your body, your blood, your tissues, the at where the bacteria live. That's the bioterrain. If it's messed up, it's like going to a desert and throwing apple seeds at the desert and yelling, grow,
Huh.
grow, grow. And it's like they're not going to grow because it's not the right bioterrain. So, I mean, the way I look at it is like, probiotics are going to help a little bit if you're putting in, multi billions and billions at a time. But if you don't have the right bioterrain, they're not going to take residence. They're not going to establish, this beautiful terrain for them to start growing and then start healing your body. And like you said, creating this boundary layer. So there's kind of, there's 2 aspects you have to deal with. Yes, it's getting the right bacteria in, but it's also creating a home for them at the same time.
So what is the gestalt there? Like what is the kind of operant framework that you do this under so that you can actually have the kind of landing zones for these bacteria to be able to live and thrive?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, there's a couple distinct steps that I take with people. One of the first ones is getting a ton of nutrition in, like lots of minerals, lots of vitamins, because that's usually what's missing. That's usually what the body is depleted in when somebody is suffering from a lot of gut related issues. And that could be anything from digestion to allergies to asthma to diabetes to obesity. I mean, it's all linked to the gut, and even autoimmune stuff, right? So if somebody's suffering there, they're usually dealing with a lot of inflammation, and their body has been leaching minerals and vitamins for usually years at this point. So we want to really flood the body with lots of minerals, lots of vitamins. And I usually do that through foods. I usually put people on a cleanse or a highly alkaline forming diet. So, I'm fine with people eating meat and stuff like that. I think you should eat what your body needs. But I want people to eat a ton of vegetables, a ton of juices, and really start being able to absorb this food.
Interesting. Do you go to soups and broths and bone broth and stuff like that if people are already kind of in a one down position?
Yeah, for sure. I love doing bone broths. Like I'll have people do bone broths and then add a lot of vegetables and cook it for a couple days, and like the whole time, every meal be having a cup full of that. Because
Hmm.
it's just like when your digestion is impaired or your gut is off, you're not absorbing food very well. And that's one of the key things. It's so we start blending, we start juicing, we start making soups, and it makes it easier for the body to start assimilating and pulling out these minerals and vitamins. I think that's a huge step in this process.
It's funny. I was writing about this a little while ago for my upcoming book in terms of how in the monasteries it was all about the soups because it's readily available energy. It's just kind of pre-digested in a lot of ways, and it just takes that burden off the digestive system, obviously, so that additional energy is available for your brain and for your higher spiritual centers and all the things that people do when they meditate. And it just makes you more efficient. So, it's a privilege to be able to eat solid food, and we take it for granted. And I guess, most people don't even chew right. So taking a couple steps back seems to be a pretty sane trajectory for people who just aren't feeling well or gassy or bloated.
I mean, when I was healing my body, I would go through phases where I call it the baby food diet.
Mm,
And
mm,
that was just like a really important part of my healing process is like, okay, let's think of this as baby food. Let's make this easy for my body to absorb what I need to start healing.
mm.
And that's the premise. Like, so everything that I teach in gut rebuilding, the premise is the body can heal itself if it's given the right tools, if it's given everything it needs. And that's kind of back to this whole bioterrain. Like when you have the right environment, the right things happen.
That's interesting. So, are there prebiotic foods that you recommend? I know a lot of people have a hard time with like the prebiotics and the fiber and all that kind of stuff. Is there like a tiptoey way in so that you don't go too fast, too furious?
I mean, I don't really focus on prebiotics until people's digestion is really up and running. So when we're doing the first phases of gut rebuilding, we just focus on getting foods in that your body can absorb and digest. And then for a lot of people, we'll just stick with, regular fermented foods, like whether it's kefir, preferably like milk or coconut kefir, homemade ideally. That's really important, actually. And then using sauerkraut or kimchi, any fermented vegetables, as long as it's lacto fermented, because it has the lactic acid that will start to kill off bad bacteria, and it's going to help nourish that bioterrain. So I think before I go into prebiotics, I usually add in some of these fermented foods for people to start experimenting with.
Okay, so this is an important part that I don't think most people have kind of wrap their brains around, is the lactic acid that is a byproduct of this fermentation process will not only usher in the new team, but will help kind of clear the neighborhoods of the bad guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, so lactic acid is pretty cool stuff. It is a pretty low pH, so it's acidic, right? It's an organic acid. It's basically bacteria pee, for lack of a better way of looking at it. And they excrete this substance. And as they're excreting it, they're kind of saying, okay, we're going to keep this our territory, right? And they really do. And the cool thing is there are no known pathogenic organisms like that can live in lactic acid. So they're really like creating this toxic substance to pathogenic organisms. It's not toxic to us. It's actually really useful for us inside of our bodies.
That's fantastic. So as you start to ferment your food or buy fermented foods or whatever it is, then you're starting to kind of tilt the scales and get rid of the bad guys, get in the good guys. And then once you have some of them, like that kind of cell-mediated defense and all that, that's part of the strategy, but you're also kind of taking it easy on the digestion so that it can stand a chance to bounce back.
Oh yeah, for sure. You just want to, people want to go too fast, too furious most of the time. And I think it's important, just let it be a slow process. The body needs time to adapt, and it needs time to absorb these vitamins and minerals. And, I think of it as a snowball effect. Just give your body time doing the right things, and you'll see this momentum build and build and build. And then that's when usually health shifts for people. And it's kind of like, sliding downhill after that point.
So when do you see the results? Like, when do you know you're starting to win?
That's a good question. You create more wiggle room. So, if you were to go out to eat, I know some people can't really handle going out to eat, or, various things, they'll really feel the effects of certain foods. They might get a little bit more wiggle room. That's how you can tell you're starting to get to a better spot. It doesn't mean you want to push that. It's just that, like, that's one of the first things you'll see. Energy levels and mental clarity are two big ones, as well as just like less anxiety and less, like low negative moods. And those are some really key things. You kind of want to pay attention. Your journal, write this stuff down, see where you're at, because watching your energy levels over the course of a few weeks can be really a great way to see how are you progressing with this.
Interesting. And then at what point is it, and I'm sure you've seen this in your practice, where people start to feel better and then they kind of go back in too soon, kind of like, hey, I'm almost over this cold, so I'll go out drinking with the guys, kind of thing, and then just kind of blow it and get worse. So like, at what point are you safe to start eating more foods? Do you just
it just depends on the person. I think that's the trickiest part, to be honest with you. That's probably most people's biggest struggle in this whole process is they're like, okay, I'm just good. I'm fine. I'm healed. And they're like, go back to whatever it was. And they may have created so much wiggle room. They might be fine for a few weeks, but then you're going to start to see some issues crop up after a few weeks once you've basically blown through all of your mineral and vitamin stores. So you have to be careful with that stuff. I mean, it depends on how you want to live your life. Do you want to be able to go out and party once a week? If so, take really good care of yourself the rest of the time. But I think, you're going to be able to tell when you start mostly introducing this new stuff and just seeing how you feel the next day. How quickly can your body bounce back? And for some people, this is about energy levels. It's also about like building energy over time to where you can exert yourself more, or maybe take on some sort of physical, maybe like some people start to do triathlons or whatever. They're like, I really want to do this physical activity. And so part of it is building up enough energy to not deplete yourself while you're trying to take on a new sport of some kind. So it just, like I said, depends on the person. But something you're bringing up, I think, is actually a really important component. And this is something I've noticed a lot lately with people, is there is this period of rest. So you can push hard and heal for a period of time. And then sometimes there's this pull to like go party is one example, or, just kind of like get off of whatever you're doing. You just kind of lose the um, willpower or just the desire even to keep moving forward with what you're doing. And I think you have to listen to that. I mean, in my experience, listening to that is important. And I think there's other parts that have to catch up, like mentally, emotionally. There's emotional healing that has to happen once you've done the physical healing, right? And so these other components really have to catch up. So, I've just noticed on this journey for a lot of my clients, we don't know how long it's going to take for each person. And
Right.
so much about this determines where they're ready, to heal their body on these other levels, like the mental, emotional level. Like I've just been blown away by this piece. Like my new question to all my clients is, what do you need to do in your life in order to handle every single thing that causes you to worry on a daily basis? Like that's the new gut rebuilding question.
Well, and really questioning that entire kind of infrastructure of saying, I'm going to be really good and I'm going to fix this thing so I could go back to punishing myself. And that kind of yo-yo attitude of self-destructive behavior, and then really kind of exerting willpower to kind of fix it and then go back and forth. What is that, and why do we do that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think ultimately my goal around all of this stuff was to be able to relax around food. I wanted to cure myself of all of my food allergies and all of my allergies and all these other things that were going on, because I wanted to just be able to relax. And that has been I had relax be the word of the year for me a few years ago. And it's been a big one. And I think that's been a huge part of getting things to get right in my gut. And I'm really noticing, like, think about when people get afraid or emotional, like angry, whatever, think about where people feel that. I mean, there's just such a huge correlation between stress and what happens in your gut. And is it ongoing stress? Are you tolerating like a high level that you don't even realize you're tolerating? Like that's messing things up. That's messing you up. That's keeping you from being able to heal your body.
There's a relationship between cortisol levels and salivary IgA, and kind of basically where the immune system interacts with the gut. And so elevated cortisol levels from stress actually impact that and diminish that. And so you'll see that all of us. Life is stressful, right? And so how do we address that? And I think you're kind of taking the bull by the horns and saying, let's look at your life and all the things that stress you, because at the end of the day, the gut's where we take it, and so everything kind of spins out from there. But stress, man, it's tough. We we had a event that I did, and Summer was there. We rented out this lake and had just a bunch of our friends there, and I pulled this stunt, right? Because we got over there and it was like 5-6 days out in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone reception. And I got out there the first night and I was like, we actually have no agenda. Tomorrow, your job is to do whatever you feel like doing. And I just I did it as a social experiment to just see if people would freak out. And, and we got like Dave Asprey and Abel James. We got a lot of our like tech friends there. And it turned into such a wonderful engagement, because people unwound and the stress just started to diminish. It was and Summer was one of the first people that came up and just gave me a big hug and a high five and was just like, awesome.
I loved it. I think we need more of that, I mean, I guess here's the thing that I've really noticed for myself is just that I have this habit of control in my life where I try to control absolutely everything. And it just somehow makes me feel a little bit more safe or secure or whatever. And I think in the process of healing, or like when I was sick, I felt really out of control. So where did I exert control? In all of the like supplements and herbs and healing procedures and this, and I started to exert it on all parts of my healing process. And I thought that was really fascinating. I've been watching people do this so much lately where they're like, these clients will come to me who have everything dialed in, and you almost want to be like, oh, I can't help you. And then I'm realizing now I absolutely can, because what you're doing is you're like over controlling the situation.
Right.
So how do we let go? Like what you set up the perfect social experiment. Like, how do we unplug? How do we let go? How do we be okay with not being in control?
Yep. Yeah, and my question then is like, whatever guy you were dating at the time, what was that relationship like when you were trying to control everything in your own world to such a micro extent that it was just like hard to be with you? You know what I mean? Like when I'm trying to exert control over my health, I'm also doing it with my family and my circumstances, and I'm just not the best me, right? It's hard.
Yeah, it's absolutely hard. It is. And I guess that's just really where this comes down to this question. And I kind of want to say it again, like what, and I want everybody to really take a moment and think about it. Like, what do you have to handle? Like, what really needs to be solved in order for you to not worry? What would be the things that would take away, even 75% of the worry in your life? What would you have to do over the next few weeks? The crazy part that I hear from a lot of people when I've been asking this question is money. That actually comes up as one of the biggest answers. It says stress about money. And so I've been looking at like, okay, well, how do we solve that?
And there's a couple sides to that, right? One is make more money, but that's not usually the answer for most people. A lot of times it's stop spending like a jerk, right? Because we spend money in ways that we don't know are unnecessary, and then it kind of gets out of control, and we're just really bad at saying no. And so, and all of the advertising and the marketing and all the stuff out there is kind of designed to, get that buck out of our wallets. So it's a two-way street, and I've actually seen that on both sides. Some people just genuinely like don't make enough money, and it's really hard to make ends meet, and I respect and honor that. And other people make a decent living and are always broke because they're just bad at managing it, and neither of those engender good health.
It's not a healthy relationship in your life. You have a bad relationship, and those behaviors extend to other parts of your life that have nothing to do with finances. And so for people who are sick, where they feel like they can't, I think this brings up the whole paradigm shift of like, you are 100% responsible for your own health. And you can't be always being like, oh, this next gadget is going to solve it,
Right.
This next thing or whatever. And it's like, you have to learn how to listen, how to trust. I mean, and that's the scariest thing I ever embarked upon, was how to trust my body. I mean, what if I wasn't right? What if in the process of trusting my body, I was wrong and I like messed up and got sicker or hurt myself, chronically in some way? Those were the real big questions. I remember the first herbalist I ever worked with. She put me on a cleanse, and she's like, okay, here, you need to do this cleanse for a period of time. Your liver is pretty clogged and messed up. Yep. Yes, it was. And so I embarked upon this vegetarian cleanse for 6 weeks. I grew up in Tennessee, right? Like, my family's from Nebraska on one side. Like, talk about like steak. Like, steak is like, that's what we eat. Like, my family, meat. I mean, it's like, that's what everything is built upon. That's in my blood, right? That mentality. Right. And so I called her up the day before the cleanse, and I was like, okay, I know the answer to this, but just can you please, I just need to hear you say it. I am not going to die without meat for 6 weeks, right? I'm trained as an herbalist. Like, I'm trained in nutrition. Like, I know these things, but it just, once you apply it to yourself, there is this fear barrier. I mean, we talk about this with sauerkraut. You make sauerkraut. It molds on top. You scrape that off. You still eat what's underneath sometimes if it passes the smell test and the taste test. But there's still a fear barrier there that we're all having to break through because of our conditioning, what we taught, what we watch other people do.
Yep. And we are creatures of habit. And, despite any book you read, any podcast you listen to, and all the kind of wisdom and knowledge that you've been kind of latching up next to, at the end of the day, applying it to your life is different math. And it's the hardest thing. And I know people that are serial consumers of podcasts and health programs and products and just all the stuff that's out there that's super good and useful and relevant most of the time. But they keep consuming the products and never applying it to their lives, and they wonder why, everyone in their lives call them health nuts, but because they haven't applied it, it never really went anywhere.
Yeah, and you have to break out of the patterns that are keeping you stuck, for sure. Yeah, this is definitely one of the really interesting parts of gut rebuilding to me. This is the part where I see it stick. Like when you ask, like, how do people like be able to party and it doesn't make them go backward? It's this place where they're able to stay relaxed, stay confident, and stay really in charge of their lives. How do you do that? How do you get to that level of self-assurance and, basically calm and grounding, right? Yeah. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to heal the gut. But then there are the basic steps. I mean, there are realistic things, like I said, like eating nutritious food, eating the right probiotics, eating the right fermented foods. I always recommend sauerkraut and kefir. I don't recommend kombucha. Like that's my least favorite ferment to like recommend to
Why?
people. I see you drinking it. I know you're drinking it.
Right. Why?
Well, it has some acids in it, so it's going to help kill off some of the bad bacteria that you don't want to grow. So it has some of the organic acids. That's a bonus. But most of it doesn't have probiotics present. Now you're drinking GTs. They add a probiotic to it. So they have one in there that's actually beneficial, and it's been studied. So you're getting the benefit. You're getting the probiotic. You're getting the organic acid. So you are helping to reframe the bioterrain. My struggle is it does have sugar. It has caffeine, and it has a little bit of alcohol. So it's got like 3 really powerful drugs in it, right? And so in that way, you can both be stimulating the nervous system, your central nervous system, to kind of like have this craving for it. But also some of the sugar can feed bacteria that you don't want to be growing. So it's one of those ones where, it's a great transition ferment. But for people who are seriously needing to rebuild their gut, and for people who do have dysbiosis, it can actually cause flare-ups. So
that is good to know.
It's real interesting.
What's funny is I have friends that are addicted to kombucha, and it didn't even occur to me that it has an alcohol content, right? And so I got some from Whole Foods the other day, and it said must be 21 or over on the label, and I'm sitting there just scratching my head. It was the first time it occurred to me that this ferment, actually fermented alcohol.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. So there's yeast that will ferment basically, the sugars into alcohol. And then that alcohol will then get fermented into vinegar, and that's where you get those sour flavors as well. So then the acetobacter, which is another bacteria, ferments alcohol into vinegar. But you always will have sugar in kombucha until it's straight vinegar. So if you're drinking it and you're drinking it and you're able to drink it, you know what I mean? Like it still has a pretty decent sugar content, and the sugar's gone, and you're like, oh, this is basically salad dressing.
Got it. Punt. Okay, I'm done with kombucha. I actually I talked to Peter Osborne about this, and he basically took me on this like no grain challenge, and was just like, just don't do any grains. And so I said, fine, I'll do it for 100 days because I do this thing called a gong. And I gotta say, so far, 32 days into it, I feel pretty damn good.
Awesome. I'm really glad to hear that. Are you eating things like sweet potatoes or starches from that genre?
Occasionally I'm kind of just on like lean proteins and vegetables, and it's fine. Like the first, like day 2, I wanted to kill myself or somebody around me, and then after that it was pretty much okay. Like I could skip meals now. It's really changed. And so it's interesting. It didn't even occur to me that this kombucha had like sugar in it, right? It's like you just assume things are good. So man, they sneak it in everywhere.
That's the thing. Okay, so that's my biggest whole fermentationist soapbox, really, is just that, a lot of our education comes from labels, and we don't mean for it to. It's just kind of where it happens, because marketing is one of the most powerful sources of information out there. I mean, on one hand, it's a great source of information, but on the other hand, sometimes it's not true, or it's not a full picture of what's happening. And so when it comes to fermented foods, there are definitely, um, I mean, I just think there's a place to understand, what's healthy, what's not. And I think, like, for example, bread, cheese, wine, beer, liquor, injera. Let's see, what else? Italy's, miso, tempeh. Those are all fermented foods.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
so, some of them are going to have just purely the benefit of tasting better or being more easily digestible. And some of them have incredible benefit of having probiotics and these organic acids like lactic acid present. So, there's just you really have to know and start looking into your ferments to know which ones are going to be good, you know?
Very interesting. Where does the detox component come in here? Because we're talking about rebuilding the gut, but it's kind of it's a dual pronged approach, right? Because if your liver isn't clearing, then everything, like, you got traffic, right? And so the body doesn't use the detox pathways, gut can't absorb, and liver can't push out, and it's a problem. So where does that fall into your gestalt? Like, how does your world work with that?
Well, so I think cleansing is a great way to help reestablish the bioterrain, actually, because a lot of times we get in this habit of like more, 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 and that's I'm going to take like two handfuls full of supplements every day and all this stuff, right? Or like I remember when I would eat like I'd be like, okay, I just ate some dark chocolate, so I'm going to eat a spinach salad to like balance that out or make that somehow okay.
10 Hail
And
Marys, 10 Hail Marys.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I just remember like eating food when I wasn't hungry to kind of balance out what I had just eaten. Anyway, so what I've realized, there's two stages to this. The gut rebuilding, that is where you bring in more nutrients, and the minerals and the vitamins help escort toxins out. But then you just need to give your body a break. So for me, cleansing has two really big benefits. One, it helps put the body in a state of rest and restore. Key. And the second benefit is that it helps you deepen your awareness of how food affects you. It helps you deepen the awareness of the messages of your body. And so the way that I teach cleansing is I basically have people go through a gentle cleanse where it is 100% alkaline foods if they can tolerate it. Some people aren't quite ready to go there yet. And if they're not, we have meat and stuff like this in the cleanse. But the cleanse is usually about, I do 10 to 14 days for people. 100% alkaline forming foods. So this is mostly vegetables, some fruits, and the protein I have people eat is usually a blue-green algae. So like E3 live or spirulina or chlorella. And that's the basis for the cleanse.
Wow.
And if they need to do smoothies, they can do smoothies. If they need juices to help absorb more nutrients, they can do that. But it's a time where you rest. It's a time where you just let the body relax. And I still have people eat, 3 meals a day and snacks if they really need it. And the focus is just cleaning up the diet for a period of time. And what you do is you take out all stimulation. So you're taking out the stimulants of like sugar or caffeine or, even meat has somewhat of a stimulating effect. And I have people do really low salt during this time as well. Because, sugar and salt, they actually determine what goes in and out of your cells. They affect cellular metabolism and cellular waste. And, they affect the way that even, your muscles are able to let go of waste and the way water moves through your body. They create an electrical gradient around cells and tissues. And so when you take the salt and sugar way down in your diet, it's going to help certain minerals start to like plop into your cells a little bit easier. And when you get more minerals, you relax more. And this is the state of rest and restore that I talk about that I think is just one of the most beneficial things of healing the body. So that's my big thing about cleansing. I just want people to really learn how to listen deeply.
So could you peel back a little bit on the alkaline foods versus acidic? Because I feel like we in the industry talk about this stuff all the time. And I know someone's listening right now going, I kind of don't know what that means. So what are the alkaline foods?
Okay, so there's a couple different ways of looking at this. There's the really nitty gritty, like putting food through like an incinerator and seeing what's left over and looking at the ash that's left over, right? And you can have like an acid byproduct or an alkaline byproduct. So that's how, there are some systems that go through this whole process and they'll tell you like, these nuts are alkaline, these ones are acid, these vegetables are acid, these vegetables are alkaline. I keep it really simple. and I found this to really work. You just, if you're eating all vegetables and fruits, you are fine.
You're okay.
You're good. There's a ton of minerals, there's a ton of vitamins. That's going to boost your alkalinity. And what I mean by that is really your metabolism has acid byproducts. It's just like the way that we like digest food and what it takes to breathe and move your body. There's all these acidic byproducts. And so you have to have this buffering system. And when you think of a buffering system, what do you think of? The sodium bicarbonate. Like if you do the volcano from kindergarten, where you have the vinegar and the baking soda, you mix them together and they're like frothing. They create a neutralized substance at the end. And your body does that. It's creating these acids, but then you have this buffering system, which is almost like having, baking soda essentially coming in and like dousing all the acids, neutralizing them so you don't harm any of your tissues. So we basically help boost people's buffering systems by adding in more vitamins, more minerals. That's it. It's just that simple. It's the mineral salts. They literally will buffer any acids that are in the body. Just like the bacteria produce acids as a byproduct, our bodies do the same thing. Like we produce lactic acid in our muscles when we run out of oxygen when we're exercising. It's a natural process. We produce lactic acid, right? Mm-hmm. That's because our muscles are fermenting when we're exercising. Literally, like it's the same process. Fermentation is a way of producing energy without oxygen. That's all it is. So it's really, really cool. Our bodies do that. So then we buffer it. And then there are foods that have a natural acidic byproduct. This is going to be like sugar, coffee, alcohol, meat. Those are the big categories. This is not a list of good foods and bad foods. Like I am not saying good and bad here at all. I don't think that's true for either of these. But I do think that when you just take, this 10 to 14 days, you do mostly alkaline foods, you see a huge shift, you see a huge difference. And you might notice, like most people are usually eating too much acid forming foods and not enough of the alkaline forming foods. And that's where we start to see issues.
So Tennessee and Nebraska, huh? So all those steaks may have created a hyperacidic environment that you had to pay for, and fortunately for the world, you went through that kind of dark night of the soul and figured it out and have helped thousands of people, which is pretty dang cool. But it wasn't cool at the time when you had to go through it, right? And so I'm assuming part of that kind of standard American diet may have led to your gut demise. Do you have something that you could pinpoint, or is it just kind of like how you grew up?
Yeah, I mean, I ate Taco Bell, drank Mountain Dew, ate some Hush Puppies, biscuits and gravy. Like I was pretty standard American diet. Like I did the fast food. We ate at home. We had like a lot of chicken fajitas was a big thing too at our family, And it wasn't, it just wasn't very nutrient dense when I go back and look at it. But I think the biggest thing that was going wrong for me, I think that you have a catalyst. So you have like three main things that cause people's guts to really go into a state of decline. And yes, nutrient deficient processed foods is one of them. The second one is stress, which I've talked about. Stress is huge. The third one is antibiotics and sometimes birth control pills or medications, things like that. But antibiotics has a huge effect on the gut. And when you put these three together, that's when you'll start to see a huge decline. Sometimes people can go with the antibiotics and the nutrient, deficient foods for a long time, and then a big emotional, stressful event happens, and that's the trigger. So, for me, it was all of those. I was dealing with all three of those pretty heavily.
Yeah, and you're not really alone in that. I mean, welcome to America. It's just, we're all under stress. We all end up getting kind of saddled with antibiotics because of the way the culture was in medicine for decades. And then, the food's the food. So we're all kind of waking up from that dream and trying to figure out how to now fix. I know pretty much everyone I know needs to rebuild their gut. I mean, it's universal. It's a thing, and it's not like a fad. I think a lot of people, see these kind of health trends come and go. This has been pretty well studied and identified in medicine. We understand what's happening now. I recommend going back and listening to a previous episode I did with Dr. Tom O'Brien on gluten sensitivity and like the shags of the carpet getting worn down, and we understand the mechanism. So it is isn't whether or not I should rebuild my gut. The question becomes, how should I rebuild my gut, and when's the soonest I can start? And that pretty much applies to all of us, right?
It does. I mean, here's the thing: is we've all been exposed to this for the most part, unless you grew up in like some amazing commune that had like organic food and you were like living this amazing like happy lifestyle. That happens. I've met those people, but that's not the majority. And so I really think that most people do need to rebuild their gut. And the thing is if you go back and you look at like ancestrally what was happening, and that's what I ask. Like, I'm trained as an herbalist. I'm always like, what did my ancestors do? Like, they didn't take probiotic pills that were made in the laboratory, right? Like that was like a big thing for me. Well, what did they do? You know, they ate these fermented foods. They did basically, like, my steps of gut rebuilding that I teach, like they did all of these things every day of their lives. So they're like constantly rebuilding their gut. That was just their life was, I'm going to eat this fermented food. I'm going to eat this healthy thing over here. I'm going to take a nap right now because I feel like it. I'm tired. Right. You know, I'm going to go get a here with this other person because I need to like relax my nervous system. Like, all these things were happening on a more regular basis. Or I'm getting chased by a freaking bear. I'm going to run it off instead of sit here at my desk and get stressed and never run it off. You know?
Totally. You know, it kind of makes me think that the mark of a rich man is not the Ferrari, but it's the ability to say, I'm going to take a freaking nap right now because I need it. Right? Like, in our day and age, it's like not having command of your time and your biorhythms, and like forcing yourself to stay awake when you're tired is pretty painful. And I think we've all done it for decades, and like that's no good on the body either. It's just, you know, it's just something that pinged me when you said that. It's just like, who the hell takes naps? Like, who's got time for that?
You know, I talk about it in terms of like healthy island and unhealthy island. And when you're on unhealthy island, like the path to healthy island is so uncomfortable. It's like covered in like, there's like nails you have to like walk over, and it's like glass on the ground. And then like the path from healthy island to unhealthy island is a freaking slip and slide. And
totally.
It's like, woo!
Totally.
Yeah.
3 margaritas later, we end up at the drive-thru at Taco Bell. Easy.
And it's fun and it feels good, you know. And part of that's because you're, you know, the unhealthy island, whatever. It's just like you're tripping up all of these like evolutionary things that are like sugar, good, you know. Look, that we need that, you know. We just haven't adapted quickly enough to understand or overcome all of these downfalls of it.
Yep. So give me quickly, if I'm listening to this and I'm like, gut rebuilding, is that for me? Is that not for me? How does one self-identify as someone who needs to build their gut?
I would say if you've taken antibiotics more than 5 times in your life is a good reason to rebuild your gut. They've shown after every single time, studies have shown that every time after taking antibiotics, you decrease your ability to reestablish the native flora. Like, each time it's more drastic. And then I would say, you know, anybody who's dealing with stress for sure is a big one. If you're suffering from allergies, asthma, any kind of, you know, bronchial issues, postnasal drip, things like that. Sinus issues is a big one as well. We'll see a lot of chronic sinus polyps, things like that in people with gut issues. Autoimmune, for sure. If you're dealing with autoimmune, no matter what kind, gut rebuilding is a big part of the healing journey there, even if it's just maintenance, depending on how far your body has gone. And then obesity, diabetes, being overweight, these are very much connected. And then, you know, I mean, this one is a kind of rides a line of some other areas too, but like anxiety, depression, you know,
Sure.
You know, mental health is actually connected to gut health. There's a ton of serotonin receptors and GABA that's produced by gut bacteria.
It's actually kind of scary how tied in this stuff is all together, and how it all kind of starts in the gut in a lot of ways. So if I was in Summer Bach's world, and that's a wonderful place to be because you're delightful, what would you put me through? Like, what order would I go through some of this stuff? Like, how would you handle my recovery?
So it depends. I mean, you personally or anyone?
No, if I'm listening to this and I've kind of grew up in Nebraska and I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there's two. I kind of have 2 ways I think about it. You know, I used to do cleansing for myself as a big way of healing my body, and then I realized that I was sort of depleting myself over time, and that's where this concept of gut rebuilding came in. I realized, oh, I could do a long-term, really clean diet that is still has room to like have fun and eat foods I need to eat, but has a bigger focus on rebuilding the body and helping boost all of the systems. So if somebody's feeling depleted or they're dealing with a lot of health concerns and issues and they've tried a lot of different things, I think gut rebuilding is a really, really good start. I think cleansing is a good option for people when they feel more like they're in a state of excess. Like you have just hung out with my family for a few days, for example. That puts you in a state of excess where you've been eating, like you ate dinner and then you go eat pizza with your beers an hour later. I don't know. It's just what we do in my family. Um, so if you, or like after the holidays, it's just like that's a state of excess. Other examples of that would just even be like, like feeling tired, like kind of like fat, greasy, tired. That kind of combination of things. Gut rebuilding is still going to help you, but I think that's the point where a cleanse is going to be more effective. So are you feeling excess or are you feeling depletion? I actually think a lot of people don't realize they're in a state of depletion. The stress has been wearing on them for a long time. Their energy levels are actually too low to really fully do a cleanse. If they start cleansing, they're going to be like on the couch sleeping for the next 2 weeks. So that's how I would look at it. Like, just really give yourself a check. Like, and do you have the time to take 2 weeks off and cleanse? If you do, awesome, let's do it, right? But if you don't, you might want to take a longer, slower approach where you're taking action every day. It's just smaller pieces of the puzzle.
Love it. I love this conversation. I think this is kind of on the front lines of medicine. This is prediction, it's prevention, it's basically intercepting disease and starting to back out of it. It's funny, I had a couple patients in the clinic yesterday. I don't get in there that often, but mom and dad had all kinds of things like hypertension and gallstones and some fatty liver and all kinds of stuff. And I'm sitting here having these conversations, looking at all this kind of elaborate stuff and labs. And at the end of the day, my conclusion to both of them was, let's clean up your gut, because that's where it starts. You know what I mean? And it's just one of those things where it seems simple, but there's so much that happens through there that then kind of goes awry if the system isn't working correctly. That's usually, in most functional medicine protocols, the place to start. And so I love that that's where you hang your hat, and you've really kind of identified that as a huge problem in society, and you're doing something about it. So I know you have a program. I wanted you to share it with our audience. I think Summer's awesome, so anything she does, I love. Just tell us about it and tell our listeners where to find it.
Yeah, well, so if you go to summerbach.com/well, I have some goodies over there. So I have a class where we're going to talk a little bit more about cleansing and detox and what you can do. But I'm also going to share my videos on how to make sauerkraut so that you can make the kind you want at home that's going to help feed your gut. So, thankfully you interviewed me, and I was on the Origins movie, which is an awesome freaking movie. And through that, we got a flood of questions where people were like, okay, I made it. A lot of people had success, but a few people were like, that didn't work. Like, mine turned this, it looks like this. And some people's, it actually did work. They just didn't know what they needed to do at the very last stages because it looked a little discolored or something. And so I am going to share the video series with you guys, Pedram, because I want all your people to really understand this process. And then we talked about your family messing up the kraut. Like, I just want everybody to understand, like, it isn't totally foolproof, and there's some things you need to watch out for. And yeah, I have 3 videos in this series where I go into detail about mistakes that you make, as well as the bacteria and what kind of probiotics in it, as well as just like the how-to. So there's 3 really distinct stages.
Fantastic. I love it. I mean, we blew it, and I don't want to do that again. And I really want our listeners to get this and be able to do it at home and feel good about it. Like, you came over and we did a video and we nailed it the first time, and I ate sauerkraut for a couple months and it was great. And so I want that again. Like, I want to keep being able to do that. So I'm just super stoked that you're going to help our listeners or viewers go through this. It's summerbach.com/well.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's it.
I want to thank you for that, and keep doing the great work that you're doing. Love having you on the show, and we'll invite you back, and let's keep having fun with this.
Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, I already have like 10 more things I want to tell all of you guys about toxins that appear from the bacteria that should not be living in your gut. Like, that's a whole other conversation we should have sometime soon.
Love it. Love it. Come on back
Yeah.
to the neighborhood. We're going to have some fun.
Will do. Thanks so much.